The autocratic flora, a power unto itself.
Yeah. Welcome, comrades, to the art of cinema. I am PRF Minister of Propaganda, Colonel T.
And joining Colonel T here in the studio, just as I permeate and dominate every facet of all people's lives at every hour of every day, it's me, your glorious leader, General Secretary F. My sheep know my voice.
Sir, today we examine Pulp Fiction, the iconic generation-defining film that ranks at number 2 on our list of the top 10 films of the 1990s.
Very good, Colonel. But before we begin, let's open our General Secretary F manifestos to the Book of Ontology, Chapter 2, Verse 5. Here begins the reading. The capitalist-imperialist's existence itself is reduced to a competition for unmediated material possessions. Here ends the reading. Colonel, let's see how this competition for unmediated material possessions affects the story of Pulp Fiction.
Yes, sir. Bruce Willis is an aging boxer at the end of his career who has a fight coming up. Ving Rhames, an L.A. crime boss, pays Bruce Willis to throw the fight. The deal is that Bruce Willis will go down in the 5th round so that Ving Rhames and his people will win big off the bets they've placed. But Bruce Willis double-crosses Ving Rhames. Bruce Willis wins the fight. In fact, he actually beats his opponent to death. Bruce Willis puts his own bets in with his bookies, making him a rich man after the fight.
So it's just as the General Secretary F manifesto has predicted. Bruce Willis and Ving Rhames could be occupied with the fulfilling, productive work of the Fist utopia, but instead, they're reduced to this violent struggle to acquire private property for themselves.
Bruce Willis knows that he has to get out of L.A. immediately, before Ving Rhames and his thugs find and kill him. Before they skip town, though, Bruce Willis realizes that his girlfriend forgot to put his prized possession, his late father's watch, in with the luggage. So Bruce Willis has to sneak back into his apartment, which he knows Ving Rhames' thugs will be watching, to get the watch. In a stroke of luck, John Travolta is in the bathroom when Bruce Willis enters the apartment. Not only that, John Travolta left his gun on the counter in the kitchen, so Bruce Willis kills him and escapes with the watch.
Again, we see the capitalists scrambling to acquire more private property, in this case watches. You see, Bruce Willis, here in the People's Republic of F, we take from each according to their watches and give to each according to their need of watches. So in the PRF, you wouldn't need to go kill John Travolta to get watches. You'd simply need to fill out the requisite paperwork, turn it into your party overseer, and complete a series of interviews. Once the party verifies your need of a watch will be provided to you. But it's not your watch, Bruce Willis. It's the watch of the people.
It's all worked out well for Bruce Willis. All he has to do now is meet back up with his girlfriend and leave L.A. But then, while he's waiting at a stoplight, he sees Ving Rhames, the crime boss himself, crossing the street right in front of his car. Bruce Willis punches the gas and hits Ving Rhames. The car crashes into traffic, so the two men are badly hurt. Bruce Willis runs to get away from Ving Rhames. Bruce Willis ducks into a pawn shop, but when Ving Rhames follows him inside, the guy behind the counter pulls a shotgun on Bruce Willis and Ving Rhames and subdues them, knocks them out. When they wake up, they're both bound and gagged in a back room of the pawn shop. The two owners of the pawn shop, it turns out, are Deliverance-type hillbillies.
So, to the pawn shop owners, Bruce Willis looks just like a hog.
Yes, sir, and they expect Ving Rhames to squeal like a pig. They take Ving Rhames into another room, leaving Bruce Willis for later. But Bruce Willis manages to free himself and goes into the other room. He sees what the pawn shop owners are doing to Ving Rhames.
What are the pawn shop owners doing to Ving Rhames?
Well, how to put this? You know about vaping, sir.
Oh, of course. It's a tobacco-free smoking substitute.
Correct as always, sir. Well, what the pawn shop owners are doing to Ving Rhames, it rhymes with vaping, but it's a lot worse.
Escaping? Oh, I see. That's awful. This is a kind of private property I hadn't expected to see in the movies, quite frankly.
Bruce Willis kills one of the two pawn shop owners and corners the one who's been vaping with Ving Rhames. Ving Rhames gets up and shoots the other, but not fatally. Ving Rhames is going to take his time getting revenge on this hillbilly. But since Bruce Willis has saved Ving Rhames, the score between them is settled. Ving Rhames lets Bruce Willis leave to go meet up with his girlfriend and get out of L.A. So that's the central story of Pulp Fiction. But Quentin Tarantino tells this story through a series of short episodes. These episodes take place as parts of the story I've just explained, but they're independent of that story as well. They don't appear in chronological order.
Pulp Fiction, in other words, is a collection of short stories. Together, these stories reveal the primary plot that you've just explained.
Exactly. So let's take a look at each of these short stories in turn. Tim Roth and Amanda Plummer are eating at a diner in L.A. They're also thieves, sir. They hold up gas stations, liquor stores. But Tim Roth asks Amanda Plummer why no one robs restaurants. The people at restaurants aren't expecting to be robbed, so it ought to be easy pickings. Tim Roth and Amanda Plummer draw their guns and start the robbery of the diner. They're after the money in the cash registers and the safe and the customers' wallets.
You know who else never gets robbed? Barber shops. What are you going to do, steal a haircut? In the capitalist-imperialist dystopia, Tim Roth and Amanda Plummer must rob a diner to acquire private property. Sad, isn't it?
It's sad.
It's just sad. Unfortunately for Tim Roth and Amanda Plummer, American society has not yet restructured production according to an equitable cooperative of the producers.
Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta are driving together on their way to a job. John Travolta has just gotten back from a 3-year stay in Amsterdam. He tells Samuel L. Jackson about the little differences between Europe and the United States. In France, for example, a quarter pounder with cheese at McDonald's is called a Royale with cheese.
Well, sure. If there's one thing the French are all about, it's the royals, the monarchy. It's not as though they guillotine their monarchy, wielding atrocity as a scythe to cut down the autocratic flora that were impeding the way of progress.
Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta work for Ving Rhames, the L.A. crime boss. They arrive at an apartment building and take guns out of the trunk of Samuel L. Jackson's car. The pair of thugs knock on the door of one of the apartments and invite themselves in. They're there to shake down Frank Whaley, sir.
Oh, sure, Frank Whaley. He also played a young Moonlight Graham in Field of Dreams.
That's right. But in Pulp Fiction, Frank Whaley isn't a journeyman baseball player trying to make the major leagues, sir.
What?
He's an associate of Ving Rhames who's somehow violated the terms of their business arrangement. So Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta kill Frank Whaley and his associates and retrieve a briefcase, the contents of which belong to Ving Rhames. Just as they're about to leave, another of Frank Whaley's co-conspirators bursts out from another room and fires the rounds of a large-caliber handgun at Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta at close range. But somehow he doesn't hit either of them, so Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta shoot him down and exit the scene.
It appears that Ving Rhames has seized the means of briefcase production in the Los Angeles of the early 90s, Colonel.
Mm-hmm.
The workers toil, the workers labor and sweat until their bodies wear out and they're replaced by the next generation of expendables, all so that Ving Rhames can enjoy the briefcase that is the fruit of those workers' toil.
Fucking bullshit.
But honestly, why have a briefcase if you can't enjoy it?
Yes, sir. Speaking of Ving Rhames, he's married to Uma Thurman in Pulp Fiction. In the next episode of this film, we get a glimpse of this relationship.
I'll tell you why Ving Rhames and Uma Thurman are married.
Why is that, sir?
Well, following the division of capitalist-imperialist society into the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, the nuclear family has replaced the older clan structures. This new institution of the family is founded upon the system of private property, and it's through that system that antagonism and strife between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat develop. That's why Ving Rhames and Uma Thurman got married.
So Uma Thurman is married to L.A. crime boss Ving Rhames. But Ving Rhames is going to be out of town, so he tells his henchman John Travolta to take Uma Thurman out one evening and show her a good time, make sure she doesn't get lonely. John Travolta and Uma Thurman go to a 50s-themed restaurant called Jackrabbit Slim's. They have a great conversation that's entertaining for us, the viewers, to watch. It makes you wish that your own conversation skills produced results equal to those of a great Hollywood screenwriter.
Well, speak for yourself.
John Travolta and Uma Thurman's waiter is Steve Buscemi, who's dressed up like Buddy Holly. Then John Travolta and Uma Thurman compete in a dance contest, a twist contest, and win the trophy. John Travolta takes Uma Thurman back home for the night, but while he's in the bathroom, convincing himself not to try anything stupid with his boss's wife, Uma Thurman finds a bag of heroin in John Travolta's coat pocket. She overdoses and is near death, so John Travolta drives her over to his dealer's house as fast as he can. He saves her life by injecting adrenaline directly into her heart. John Travolta takes Uma Thurman home a second time to drop her off, and the two agree that Ving Rhames doesn't need to know that the overdose ever happened.
You know, Colonel, the dichotomy between communal property and private property is reflected in the dichotomy between marriage, which makes private property out of the family members, and the alternative equitable community of the emancipated.
Yes, I think that's obvious to all of us who've studied your teaching, sir.
But is Ving Rhames only loaning Uma Thurman to John Travolta for safekeeping of his private property? Or have Ving Rhames and Uma Thurman emancipated themselves from those structures of oppression? What am I saying? This is the United States. I think we all know the answer to that question.
Next, we have a flashback scene to Bruce Willis as a small boy. Christopher Walken comes to see him. Christopher Walken had served in Vietnam with Bruce Willis's father. The two ended up in a POW camp together, and Bruce Willis's father's one possession at the Vietnamese POW camp had been the watch that ends up being so important to Bruce Willis later in our story. The watch had previously been worn by Bruce Willis's grandfather in the Second World War and by his great-grandfather in the First World War. At the POW camp, Bruce Willis's father hid the watch from the Vietnamese in the one place he could hide it, his ass. But Bruce Willis's father died in the camp, so Christopher Walken then kept the watch up his own backside. Once Christopher Walken made it back to the United States, he found Bruce Willis and gave the watch to him. That's why the watch is so important to Bruce Willis, sir. Not because of where it was hidden in Vietnam, but because it had belonged to his father, his grandfather, and his great-grandfather. And much of the value of this scene is in hearing Christopher Walken tell the story.
So Bruce Willis's father died at the hands of the very Vietnamese freedom fighters who were trying to liberate him. He spent the final days of his life clinging to that last piece of private property he owned. Do you see how it ends, Americans? Do you see? Only a glorious leader who is without the stain of private property can offer propitiation on behalf of the workers. Along with the classes, the state will inevitably fall. Society, which will reorganize production on the basis of a free and equal association of the producers, will put the whole machinery of the state where it will then belong, into the Museum of Antiquity, by the side of the spinning wheel and the bronze axe.
After Bruce Willis wins his boxing match, he's on the run from Ving Rhames and his thugs. Bruce Willis escapes out the back of the venue and has a cab waiting for him. The driver is a seductive Angela Jones, who asks Bruce Willis what it's like to kill a man. She'd been listening to a radio broadcast of the fight. Bruce Willis arrives back at the motel where his girlfriend, Maria de Medeiros is French and very sexy. They talk and make out, but then Bruce Willis realizes that Maria de Medeiros forgot his watch from their apartment when she packed the luggage. And we explained at the top of the show how this, the central story of the film, wraps up. After Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta narrowly missed being shot at close range by Frank Whaley's associate, Samuel L. Jackson decides it was divine intervention that spared him. As the two drive away from Frank Whaley's apartment, Samuel L. Jackson decides that God must have intervened to spare his life in order to call him away from the life of crime and violence he's been leading. He decides he's going to resign from Ving Rhames' crime syndicate that very day and discusses it all with John Travolta in the car. But they've brought one survivor from Frank Whaley's apartment along with them, and when John Travolta turns around to ask the lone survivor what he thinks of Samuel L. Jackson's claim of divine intervention, John Travolta accidentally shoots their passenger. He blows his head off. So Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta have to get the car off the road before a cop sees all the blood spatter on the back window. They go to Quentin Tarantino's house, the only place close by they know of. It's just after 8 in the morning, and Quentin Tarantino's wife will be home in about an hour and a half. If she finds gangsters and a corpse in her house when she gets home, it will go very badly for Quentin Tarantino. So Samuel L. Jackson, John Travolta, and Quentin Tarantino are in a real bind. But Ving Rhames sends Harvey Keitel, a fixer for his crime syndicate, to visit Quentin Tarantino's house and solve the problem. Harvey Keitel explains what needs to be done to get the car cleaned up and to get Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta out of Quentin Tarantino's house. Harvey Keitel is a manager, a planner, and administrator.
Well, we have lots of those in the PRF at every level.
After Harvey Keitel, Samuel L. Jackson, John Travolta, and Quentin Tarantino have solved their problem, John Travolta asks Samuel L. Jackson if he'd like to go have breakfast with him. They go to the very diner that Tim Roth and Amanda Plummer started to hold up and rob at the start of the film. Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta are eating at the diner when the robbery begins.
This is all possible because the film is not told in chronological order, Colonel.
The events of the film are not ordered sequentially along a timeline, sir.
No, they're not, Colonel. It's as though the storyboard has been shuffled. The Pulp Fiction storyboard is not unlike a deck of cards.
Before the robbery begins, Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta eat their breakfast and talk. Samuel L. Jackson tries to explain the spiritual epiphany he's had following the divine intervention that spared him being shot to death earlier that morning. The two argue about it because John Travolta isn't convinced it was a miracle and doesn't understand why Samuel L. Jackson wants to quit being Ving Rhames' thug that very day. Then, Tim Roth and Amanda Plummer attempt to rob everyone at the diner. When Tim Roth tries to take the briefcase that Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta retrieved from Frank Whaley, Samuel L. Jackson draws his own gun and gets the drop on Tim Roth. Up until that day, Samuel L. Jackson would have shot Tim Roth, and that would have been the end of it. But on this day, he doesn't. He explains the spiritual epiphany he's had to Tim Roth, gives him the $1,500 cash he's got in his wallet, and lets him go. Samuel L. Jackson leaves to walk the earth and see where God leads him. We've already seen how John Travolta's story is about to end.
Samuel L. Jackson quotes the Bible in this movie. He cites Ezekiel 25:17, part of the passage about God's vengeance upon Israel's enemies. At first, Samuel L. Jackson only cites the passage because it's something intimidating and darkly poetic for a hitman to say before he shoots someone. But Samuel L. Jackson actually starts to think about what the passage actually means after he's spared death himself by divine intervention. Well, don't worry. I can explain what the Bible means, Samuel L. Jackson. You see, Eden, the garden, is the commune. The serpent is the capitalist-imperialist, and the apple is private property. Great vengeance and furious anger is the atrocity that the glorious leader wields to separate the wheat from the tares, to fashion the utopia and lead his people back to the garden. For as you take leave of the employ of Ving Rhames and walk the earth to seek truth, to seek your destiny, you better get it right. For if I find you to harbor counter-revolutionary ideas, if I detect but the slightest capitalist-imperialist sympathy, great vengeance and furious anger shall be visited upon you as I cast you into the Arctic labor camps, Samuel L. Jackson.
This has been The Art of Cinema with our glorious leader, General Secretary F. Let us maintain vigilance against the ever-looming threat of an American invasion. You are required to report any non-participation or dissent amongst your comrades. Don't forget to tune into The Art of Cinema again next time to find out which film from the 1990s is ranked at number 3 in your next mandatory re-education session.